moment most of the galaxy barely cared about. Humanity, a species many alien councils believed was too unpredictable, was pushed out to the far edge of known space. It wasn't a dramatic event. There were no massive battles, no loud arguments, and no emotional speeches. The alien leaders simply decided that humans were more trouble than they were worth. They marked Earth and its colonies as unstable zones and quietly approved a relocation order that pushed humans away from the busy center of the galaxy dot to the powerful civilizations. This was nothing more than a quick decision, a small administrative move to make their own political lives easier. They thought humans would complain, make noise for a few years, then settle peacefully into the shadows where no one would hear from them again. In their eyes, humans were too small, too scattered, and too emotional to build anything meaningful. The general opinion across alien broadcasts was that humanity would fade into silence, becoming an irrelevant footnote in galactic history. But the truth was completely different. When the news reached humans, they didn't react the way the galaxy expected. There was confusion, frustration, even disbelief. But there was also something else, a quiet determination. Humans had always carried this strange inner spark, something that awakened whenever they were underestimated. And this time, the spark grew stronger than ever. The ships that carried the first groups of relocated humans traveled through long, empty stretches of space. Outside the windows, stars looked colder, and the silence felt heavier. Some people whispered that maybe the galaxy was right, maybe they really didn't belong in the central systems. But as the ships kept moving deeper into the forgotten regions, that whisper faded, replaced by a slow, growing sense of possibility. When the ships finally reached the outer territories, the sight was unexpected. The region didn't look like exile. It looked like a raw, untouched frontier. There were broken asteroid belts filled with rare minerals, abandoned ruins from civilizations that disappeared ages ago, and clusters of star systems no one had bothered to chart. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and filled with secrets, but it was also free. There were no alien councils here, no strict laws from old powers, no constant supervision. Humanity suddenly had something they rarely experienced in the galaxy: space to breathe and space to build. Out here, the rules that once limited them no longer applied. The first settlements were difficult. People struggled with unstable planets, shifting environments, and strange energy fields that behaved differently from anything seen closer to the galactic center. But instead of giving up, humans adapted. They always had this ability to adjust quickly, to find solutions even when things looked hopeless. It wasn't dramatic or miraculous. It was simply the way humans were built. Engineers learned to use fragments of old alien ruins, turning forgotten technology into tools. Farmers learned to grow crops in unpredictable climates by experimenting with new soil mixes and greenhouse systems. Explorers mapped asteroid fields by hand because no reliable navigation charts existed. Bit by bit, city by city, humanity carved a place for itself in the farthest corner of space dot during those early decades. Something important happened, something that would later become the foundation of an empire. Humans stopped thinking like a species that needed approval from others. They stopped waiting for permission to grow or innovate. The pain of being dismissed slowly transformed into a quiet strength. The exile, instead of breaking them, freed them from expectations and limitations. Children, growing up in these new territories, didn't see themselves as people who were pushed away. They saw themselves as pioneers shaping a new future. Their schools taught independence, creativity, and problem-solving. Their families told stories not about being banished, but about having the courage to start again where no one else dared to live. Entire generations grew up this way, with no fear of the unknown. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy didn't pay any attention. The powerful civilizations continued arguing over borders, resources, and political systems. News channels covered debates about trade routes and leadership elections. No one bothered to check what humans were doing in the outer space region. The idea that humanity might be building something great never crossed anyone's mind, and that silence gave humans an unexpected advantage. With no constant oversight, no pressure from large councils, and no restrictions from ancient laws, they experimented freely. They combined old alien technology with new human ideas. They tested hyperspace engines without waiting for permission. They redesigned energy systems, communication networks, and even new types of starships. And because there were no witnesses, every mistake and improvement happened quietly. Without criticism in this forgotten corner, humanity discovered its true strength, the ability to learn faster than any species predicted. They weren't the oldest species, and they weren't the strongest, but they were adaptable, curious, and relentless. They could take broken parts and create something functional. They could take a resource others abandoned and find a new use for it. They could look at a problem and come up with 3 different solutions. And slowly, something remarkable began to form. Clusters of small settlements connected to one another and turned into networks. These networks turned into organized zones. Zones turned into districts. Districts turned into entire regions working under a shared purpose. Humans didn't plan to build something big. They simply worked together because the isolation taught them the value of unity. The people who once arrived as exiles were now the creators of new stations, new routes, and new ideas. Their ships began to travel between distant outposts, carrying supplies, knowledge, and hope. Instead of seeing themselves as victims of exile, humans began to feel like builders of something new, something that didn't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. By the time a few decades passed, humanity had formed a society that looked nothing like the one they had left behind. They were more disciplined, more focused, and more skilled. Even their children learned things most adults in the central galaxy didn't understand. Life still had challenges, but humans met each one with creativity instead of fear. If someone had traveled to human space during this era, they would have never guessed they were looking at a species that had once been dismissed. They would have seen floating cities orbiting quiet stars, mining operations that turned asteroid belts into thriving hubs, research labs that glowed with soft blue lights, and people who walked with confidence, people who believed in their own future. But no one came. No one checked. No one paid attention. And because of that, humanity continued to grow far beyond what anyone expected. This growth didn't happen with big speeches or dramatic moments. It happened day by day through simple actions. A mechanic fixing a faulty engine in a small workshop. A scientist running late-night tests on an unstable energy crystal. A pilot risking a new travel route through an unknown region. A family teaching their children patience and curiosity. These everyday efforts became the base of something great, an empire forming quietly in the dark, unnoticed by the galaxy that once pushed humans away. What makes this part of the story powerful is not the technology they built, or the places they settled, but the spirit that developed among them. They didn't complain about being forgotten. They didn't wait for rescue or recognition. They worked with what they had, learned from every challenge, and slowly built a society that reflected their determination. As humanity expanded into the outer territories, they realized something important. Isolation wasn't a punishment. It was freedom, freedom to grow, freedom to evolve, freedom to become more than anyone believed possible. And while the galaxy continued its old routines, unaware and uninterested, humanity's foundations were being laid brick by brick. No one saw it. No one measured it. No one understood what it would eventually become, but the seeds of a future empire were already planted. What started as exile was slowly turning into the beginning of a story the galaxy would never forget. Years after humanity settled into the far edge of the galaxy, the region everyone else had forgotten. Life there wasn't easy, but something unusual had started happening. People were no longer just surviving the tough conditions. They were learning from them, growing stronger because of them, and building things that would have been impossible in the comfortable central regions. The galaxy, busy with its own arguments and politics, had no idea what was quietly taking shape far away. In those early years, the most surprising thing was how fast humans adapted. Some species needed centuries to adjust to new climates or technologies. Humans adjusted in a single generation. They learned how to create heat shields that could withstand unstable stars, how to build housing on planets with shifting temperatures, and how to operate machines left behind by civilizations that vanished long before any living species existed. Every challenge became a lesson, every mistake a new discovery. Within a few decades, the scattered human outposts began to change. At first they were small, just clusters of shelters and temporary buildings made from whatever materials were available. But slowly they turned into organized settlements with real roads, proper living spaces, power grids, and training centers. People stopped acting like they were temporary guests in the outer territories. They began living like owners. The growth wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was gradual, almost unnoticed by the people who were living through it. A technician repaired an old engine and shared the upgraded design with another outpost. A scientist discovered a way to store energy inside crystal fragments found in asteroid fields. A group of engineers created a new type of cooling unit by studying the shell structure of a local creature. These were small achievements on their own, but together they formed the base of something big. The outer territories soon became a place filled with creativity. Unlike the central galaxy, where strict laws controlled what could be built and tested, the forgotten regions had no such restrictions. People experimented freely. Young students built model drones that worked better than official council versions. Mechanics bonded with old alien devices and brought them back to life. Farmers learned to grow crops in soil that even machines had given up on. The real turning point came when a group of explorers found ruins on a moon orbiting a burnt-out star. The ruins were not from any known species. They were made from strange metal that was extremely light but incredibly strong. The explorers carefully brought small pieces back to their settlement. Scientists tested them and discovered they reacted to energy in ways no modern material did. This one discovery opened the door to hundreds of new ideas. It improved engines, ship frames, tools, and communication devices. This was how humanity advanced, quietly, step by step, each discovery building on the last. No one celebrated loudly. No one bragged. They were too busy working, learning, and creating. Over the next few decades, a pattern formed. Every time humans faced something the galaxy believed was impossible, they found a way to make it possible. They used abandoned star systems as research zones. They connected settlements through long travel routes they charted themselves. They built stations in areas filled with dangerous radiation by creating new shielding techniques from the metal found in the ruins. Outside the human territory, the galaxy continued to underestimate them. When alien broadcasts mentioned humans at all, they described them as a species that had been pushed out of the main zones for being too emotional, too unpredictable, too wild. No one checked if this old description was still true. No one imagined it might have changed. Back in the outer territories, humans had no idea these broadcasts existed. They were too focused on building a life that worked. What made the growing society unique was how deeply connected people became. They weren't citizens of a struggling exile anymore. They were part of a network of settlements that depended on one another. When one outpost invented something new, they shared it with everyone. When another discovered a better farming method, the news traveled across the region in days. This sharing of ideas gave humans an advantage no other species had. They didn't compete with one another. They cooperated naturally, almost instinctively. One settlement specialized in energy research. Another focused on ship manufacturing. Another became known for creating the fastest communication systems. Slowly, without planning it, humanity created a decentralized system where every group supported the others. Children growing up in these outposts learned things the old galaxy considered advanced. They repaired small machines before they learned advanced math. They learned to navigate the stars before they learned history. They grew up with the belief that problems were puzzles, not obstacles. They were taught to think, to question, to improve. In the central galaxy, kids learned what the councils wanted them to learn. In human space, kids learned what reality required them to learn, and that made all the difference. Another key part of humanity's rise came from something simple: curiosity. Humans were always asking questions, exploring abandoned structures, or testing new tools. They had a habit of poking things they didn't fully understand. Sometimes it caused problems. More often, it led to discoveries that changed everything. One day, a small group of engineers trying to repair a broken scanning device accidentally discovered a way to map dark matter pockets. They didn't even realize how important it was until their data helped navigators safely cross a region known for swallowing ships. Another time, a worker studying old alien crystals found a new method of storing information inside tiny energy channels. This discovery improved communication speed across the entire human network. None of these breakthroughs were part of a big plan. They happened because people were curious, determined, and unafraid of failure. They didn't see themselves as geniuses or heroes. They were just ordinary people trying to solve everyday problems. But their ordinary efforts kept adding up. As the settlements grew more advanced, their ships changed too. The first human ships in the outer territories were old, slow, and barely safe. But over the years, engineers upgraded them piece by piece. They added better engines, stronger frames, smarter navigation tools, and more efficient power sources. Eventually, the ships became faster than anything the central galaxy used. Without meaning to, humans created fleets that could travel farther, last longer, and carry more than the ships built by the old alien councils. Still, no one noticed. Humanity was too far, too quiet, and too busy to attract attention. There was also a cultural shift happening among the people. The memory of exile faded. New generations didn't feel like they were living in a place forced on them. They felt like they were living in a place chosen by them. They developed pride in their environment. They respected the difficult lands and unpredictable stars because they had learned from them. People began to say things like, "We build because no one else will," or "Out here, we write our own rules," or "The galaxy forgot about us." But that gave us the freedom to grow. These were not angry statements. They were confident ones, spoken with a calm understanding of how far humanity had come. Cities started rising near stable stars, built with glowing blue windows and structures that curved like the ruins humans once studied. Mining hubs spread across asteroid belts. Research labs filled with soft white lights grew on silent moons. Farms flourished inside climate-controlled domes. Every system humanity touched became organized, efficient, and alive. Travel routes connected everything, forming patterns across the outer territories like a shimmering web. What had once been a forgotten corner of the galaxy now had more activity than some central regions. And still, no one outside human space had a clue. What made this rise even more incredible was how naturally it happened. There were no political campaigns. No one declared a new era. No one woke up one day and said, "Let's build something great." Humanity simply lived, worked, discovered, and shared, and through these small actions, a powerful society took shape. The outer territories had become a place where every person felt they were contributing to something meaningful, even if they didn't fully understand what that something was yet. They only knew they were part of a growing world that felt strong, organized, and full of potential. Humanity didn't rise because they were trying to prove the galaxy wrong. They rose because they were trying to prove themselves right. Piece by piece, year by year, innovation by innovation, they built a foundation most species would need centuries to create. The galaxy pushed humans away, thinking it would silence them. Instead, it gave them the quiet space they needed to become extraordinary. And soon, without planning it, without expecting it, humanity reached a point where their progress could no longer remain hidden. Their rise was almost complete. With a moment that no one in human space expected, and no one in the central galaxy was prepared for. After decades of silence, a small scouting vessel from the inner regions drifted into human territory. It wasn't a powerful ship or an official diplomatic mission. It was just a simple explorer craft kicking star routes. But its arrival would change everything, not because it came with threats, but because of what the scouts saw when they crossed the invisible line into human space. The scouts had been told stories about the outer territories. Old broadcasts claimed it was a dark, empty wasteland where humans lived in broken shelters, barely surviving. Many in the central galaxy still believed that humans were nothing more than exiles trying to stay alive. So when the scouting vessel entered human space, the crew expected to find silence, damaged stations, or abandoned planets. Instead, the first thing they saw was a massive structure orbiting a calm blue star. It looked nothing like the crude outposts they imagined. The station was smooth and bright, built from metal that shimmered softly like it was alive. Ships moved in organized patterns around it, following carefully designed routes that hinted at a level of discipline the scouts had never seen in this part of the galaxy. The crew froze in their seats. They didn't even think of sending a message at first. They just stared, unable to understand what they were looking at. Some of them wondered if they had somehow gone off course and ended up near a powerful empire's territory. But then their navigation confirmed it clearly. They were right where they thought they were. This glowing, advanced structure floating in space belonged to humans. As they drifted closer, they began noticing more details. There were workers repairing parts of the station using small floating platforms. There were cargo ships smoothly docking and leaving. There were lights that moved in patterns across the exterior, showing a communication system far more advanced than anything the central galaxy used. Everything seemed calm, controlled, and efficient. One of the scouts whispered quietly, almost afraid to break the silence, "This can't be real." But the others knew it was. The technology in front of them was too intricate to be a trick, too organized to be luck, too polished to belong to a species that was supposedly struggling. For the first time in many generations, the galaxy received a new reminder humans were unpredictable, yes, but not in the way everyone assumed. The scouting vessel continued deeper into human territory, partly because they were curious, and partly because they didn't know how to turn back without looking foolish. As they traveled, they saw more signs of a civilization that had grown far beyond expectations. They saw floating farms orbiting small moons. They saw communication arrays stretching across star systems like glowing bridges of energy. They saw mining operations that turned unstable asteroid belts into thriving industry zones. They saw trade ships moving with confidence, using routes no one had ever mapped before. The crew kept scanning everything, sending quiet updates to their ship's logs. The more they saw, the more their confusion grew. There was also something unusual about the way humans organized their territory. It wasn't messy. It wasn't chaotic. It felt balanced. Every outpost seemed connected to another, forming patterns as if the entire region was part of one large, carefully crafted design. The scouts, noticed something else. Two human ships didn't look intimidating. They weren't covered in sharp angles or heavy armor like the warships used by other empires. Instead, human ships looked clean, smooth, and fast. It was almost as if humans had designed them for long journeys rather than threats. But the scouts could tell from the readings that the ships carried powerful engines and advanced navigation systems. This combination confused the scouting crew even more. They had expected a rough, desperate civilization. Instead, they found something that looked confident and prepared. Eventually, the scouting vessel came close enough to one of the human stations that they had to send a message or risk being considered suspicious. They sent a simple greeting, unsure if they would receive a response. They expected difficulty, maybe a delayed reply or a confused message. They thought humans might not have the communication systems to understand them. The response came instantly. A soft, calm voice from the station welcomed them, asked if they needed help, and offered docking coordinates if they wished to rest. The voice sounded peaceful, not surprised or alarmed. It was the kind of voice that comes from someone who is used to meeting travelers, not someone living in fear. The scouts exchanged nervous looks. They weren't sure what to do. They carefully explained that they were on a mapping mission and had not expected to find anyone here. The station replied politely, explaining that human space had been developing for many years and that visitors were always treated with respect. The scouts hesitated, but eventually decided to dock. They knew they had to learn more, even if the situation made their hearts race with uncertainty. When their ship entered the docking bay, the crew looked around in disbelief. The interior was bright, clean, and filled with advanced machinery. Human workers moved across platforms, carrying tools and equipment that looked highly sophisticated. No one seemed afraid. No one stopped to stare at the visitors. Everyone looked focused, calm, and confident. One of the scouts whispered, This isn't exile. This is something else." When the human representatives approached them, the scouts felt even more unprepared. The humans didn't look desperate or worn out. They carried themselves with a quiet strength, the kind that comes from years of building something meaningful. They asked friendly questions, offered food, and made sure the visitors felt welcome. The scouting crew eventually asked the question that had been pressing on their minds since they arrived. How? How did humans build all this? The human representatives simply smiled and explained the truth. They said they had no choice but to grow. They had been given harsh environments, abandoned resources, and empty space, but that space had become a blessing. With no one watching them, no one restricting them, and no one telling them what they couldn't do, they discovered their true abilities. Humans had spent generations studying ruins, experimenting with old technology, and creating their own ideas without fear of being judged or controlled. The scouting crew listened quietly, taking in every word. They realized that humanity's strength didn't grow from anger or revenge. It grew from patience, curiosity, and a need to build a better life. They didn't rise to challenge the galaxy. They rose because they wanted to survive and grow on their own terms. After several hours, the scouts left the station. Their minds were heavy with everything they had seen. They knew that when they returned to the central galaxy and reported the truth, no one would believe them at first. The idea that humans had built something so advanced and organized and complete. Isolation would shake every old belief dot as their ship traveled back toward the main systems. The scouts kept replaying everything in their minds, the glowing stations, the calmed human voice, the organized routes, the technologies that didn't exist anywhere else. They knew this was the beginning of something much bigger. By the time they reached central space, rumors had already begun to spread. Their logs leaked into private networks. Their descriptions flowed into communication channels. Other species started whispering among themselves. Some were curious. Some were nervous. Some were dismissive. But one thing was clear. The galaxy had no idea what was happening on the edge of its map. They had forgotten humans. They had ignored them. They had assumed the exile ended the story. But instead, the exile created something new, a rising force, shaped not by power, but by quiet capability. The first encounter didn't end with conflict or tension. It ended with uncertainty. The galaxy wasn't sure what to think. They weren't sure if they should be impressed or afraid. And humanity, back in the outer territories, simply continued doing what they did best, building, learning, and preparing for whatever came next. The time for the galaxy to discover the truth had finally begun. Humanity quietly started expanding across the outer territories, far beyond the settlements that had first taken root after their exile. By this time, the human network was no longer fragile or temporary. It had grown into a vast system of interconnected settlements, trade routes, and research stations, each one contributing to a larger purpose without anyone fully realizing the scope. What made humanity unique was that this expansion was never forced or rushed. They didn't move out to conquer or intimidate. They moved because they had learned to grow steadily, carefully, and efficiently. The first expansions weren't dramatic. Humans simply sent small teams to unexplored systems to see what they could find. They mapped uncharted stars, discovered planets that could support life, and identified resources that no one had considered valuable. Every new settlement started small, often a single research outpost or a few modular homes near water sources or energy pockets. Yet even at this modest stage, every location was designed for long-term growth. Humans thought ahead, building stations that could expand, adding engines to ships that could carry more, and designing energy grids that could handle hundreds of future systems. The galaxy, meanwhile, had begun to notice small hints of humanity's presence. Traders passing near the outer territories occasionally encountered efficient docking stations and highly organized supply chains. Scouts from nearby empires reported seeing ships moving faster and farther than they should, yet operating with precision and discipline. Some dismissed these reports as exaggeration. Others were curious but hesitant to investigate. The Central Powers were too busy arguing over their borders and politics to pay serious attention. By the time anyone cared, humans had already laid the foundations for the next stage of their growth. One of the most remarkable aspects of this expansion was how humans approached diplomacy and trade. Unlike other species, they didn't move into new systems demanding submission or offering threats. They approached quietly, offering help to smaller worlds that had been overlooked or ignored. Planets that struggled with unstable climates or poor resources were given advanced energy systems, reliable communications, and protection from local hazards. Humans didn't expect gratitude, they only expected collaboration. In return, these planets offered loyalty, support, and access to resources. This created a network of mutual benefit, a structure that was far stronger than any empire built on fear. Trade routes became the arteries of this growing society. Humans mapped efficient paths through asteroid belts, dense nebulae, and unstable star fields. Ships moved with precision, carrying not only supplies, but knowledge. When one settlement discovered a new energy source, information about it traveled instantly to other colonies. When another created advanced repair technology, the news spread quickly, allowing entire systems to benefit. Unlike empires in the central galaxy, which often hoarded technology for power, humans shared freely. Their expansion wasn't about domination. It was about building something stable, efficient, and interconnected. While humans were busy expanding, other civilizations in the galaxy began to pay closer attention. Initially, they underestimated what they saw. It's just a small group of exiles trying to survive, one council official claimed. They cannot pose a threat, even if they are organized. But as explorers returned with reports of precise fleets, advanced stations, and thriving planets, disbelief began to spread. The galaxy realized that the humans were no longer struggling, they were thriving. They were expanding not recklessly, but with purpose. Every system they entered became stronger, more stable, and more connected. Human fleets played a significant role in this expansion, even though they were not built for intimidation. Ships were fast, reliable, and designed for long journeys. They could carry materials, technology, and even medical supplies to remote worlds. These ships were also capable of defending themselves if necessary, but they weren't overtly militaristic. This combination confused neighboring species. They had grown accustomed to fleets being a symbol of war, yet humans seemed to be building theirs, simply to support and connect their growing society. And this made them unpredictable, which in turn made them dangerous in ways the galaxy did not yet understand. The more the humans expanded, the more their systems flourished. Energy grids powered cities that glowed like stars in the night. Agricultural domes produced more food than ever thought possible on distant planets. Research stations discovered new methods for faster communication, cleaner energy, and safer travel across the galaxy. These achievements weren't centralized in one location. They were shared across the entire network. It was as if humanity had created a living organism, with each settlement acting like a vital organ supporting the rest. One day, a human fleet approached a small system that had long been neglected by nearby empires. The planets there were struggling with unstable weather and limited resources. The humans didn't demand anything. Instead, they offered guidance, repaired infrastructure, and shared technology. The inhabitants were amazed. They had never seen such efficiency or generosity. By the time the humans left, the system was transformed. Resources were stable, cities were functioning, and trade routes were open. The inhabitants didn't feel dominated, they felt respected. And their loyalty to humanity was permanent. Over time, humanity's networks spread to systems previously considered unreachable. They built advanced relay stations across nebulae, mapped hyperspace shortcuts through dense asteroid fields, and established way stations for travelers who would otherwise have been lost. They didn't just settle planets, they connected them, created stability, and fostered growth wherever they went. Each system that joined humanity's network made the network stronger, and each success made humans more confident in their abilities. By this stage, the galaxy had started to whisper. Traders, explorers, and even council members could no longer ignore the growth of human influence. "They are building something," one official said, "but we do not know what." Another added, "They are not like any other species we have faced. Their growth is calm, methodical, and far beyond what we expected." These whispers began spreading uneasily through the galactic councils. Some saw humans as a potential ally. Others began to sense the risk of ignoring them any longer. Even as attention increased, humans did not change their approach. They did not seek war, control, or revenge for the exile they had once endured. Instead, they continued doing what had always worked: sharing, building, learning, and connecting. Their expansion was natural, almost invisible, yet incredibly powerful. By the time the central galaxy started noticing, humanity had already achieved a level of stability and organization that rivaled the oldest empires. Also developed systems of governance that were efficient and fair. Decision-making wasn't about one person or council having absolute power. Instead, systems were designed to include representatives from multiple planets, ensuring that each settlement's needs were considered. This created loyalty and trust, because everyone felt included in the decisions that affected them. No empire in the central galaxy had achieved this level of fairness while also growing so rapidly. The greatest strength of this expansion, however, was the culture humans created along the way. People had grown up hearing stories of exile and hardship. But they also grew up believing in curiosity, creativity, and resilience. Every settlement encouraged education, invention, and problem-solving. Children learned not just how to survive, but how to improve systems, solve problems, and help others. These values became embedded in the very foundation of human space, ensuring that the empire would continue to thrive for generations. Humans also discovered that their expansion did not need to be loud or aggressive to be effective. While empires in the central galaxy often competed openly, humans quietly worked behind the scenes, connecting systems and stabilizing regions. This subtle approach made them almost invisible to other species for a long time, which allowed them to grow without interference. By the time others realized the scale of humanity's influence, the network was already too strong to ignore. Small planets that had been struggling now became productive contributors to the human system. Asteroid belts that had been abandoned were mined efficiently. Abandoned ruins became research stations. Trade hubs flourished where previously there had been chaos. Slowly but steadily, humans transformed the forgotten outer territories into one of the most advanced and organized regions in the galaxy. By the end of this stage, it became clear that humanity had achieved something extraordinary. They had expanded far beyond what anyone predicted, without using intimidation, without forcing submission, and without seeking revenge. They had grown stronger than the galaxy expected, built a stable network that connected countless systems, and created a culture of fairness, innovation, and loyalty. And yet, even after all this growth, humans never stopped. Every new system they explored, every settlement they improved, every trade route they established, added another layer to a foundation that would soon become unshakable. The outer territories, once ignored and dismissed, were now alive with the energy of human civilization. Each success made the next expansion easier. Each challenge made humans wiser. And every quiet achievement added to a growing reputation that the galaxy was only beginning. Galaxy finally started to take notice. For decades, humans had quietly grown in the outer territories, building settlements, trade networks, and advanced fleets without anyone paying attention. Now, the first waves of reports began to reach the central systems. Traders, scouts, and minor officials spoke of planets that were thriving under human care, of stations that were brighter and more advanced than anything the galaxy expected, and of fleets that moved with speed and precision beyond imagination. At first, these stories were dismissed as exaggerations. They cannot possibly be this advanced, some officials said. Humans were exiles. They could never rise so far so fast. But the reports kept coming. Every message reinforced the same truth. Humanity was no longer the struggling, forgotten species the galaxy once thought it was. Their influence stretched across multiple star systems. Their technology was practical, efficient, and advanced. Their people were disciplined, clever, and cooperative. And their expansion showed no signs of stopping. The first official contact came in a quiet way. A delegation from one of the older empires arrived at a human-controlled system, expecting to find nothing more than scattered settlements and struggling inhabitants. Instead, they were met with thriving cities, organized fleets, and representatives who spoke clearly and confidently. There was no anger, no hostility, no attempt to intimidate. Humans simply welcomed them, offered assistance, and explained their networks. The delegation was stunned. They had anticipated resistance, confusion, or fear. Instead, they found a society that was calm, intelligent, and capable. They realized that they were not visiting exiles. They were visiting the leaders of a civilization that had quietly become one of the most advanced in the galaxy. Their initial reports back to the central councils were full of disbelief. Officials listened with skepticism at first, but as more delegations returned with similar stories, the truth could no longer be ignored. For humanity, the situation was simple. They had no desire to dominate or conquer. They didn't need to prove themselves through war or force. Their goal had always been survival, growth, and improvement. The exile had forced them to develop qualities other species often overlooked: patience, cooperation, adaptability, and resilience. They had built an empire not by intimidating others, but by quietly proving their value through consistent effort. As more empires learned about human expansion, some attempted to negotiate alliances. Others were cautious, fearing humans might turn aggressive once they had enough strength. Humans approached these situations with the same clarity they applied to everything else. They did not boast or make threats. They offered mutual benefit. Systems could join the human network voluntarily, contributing resources, knowledge, and labor, while receiving protection, technology, and stability in return. This approach was revolutionary. Most empires in the galaxy relied on control and fear to maintain order. Humans relied on trust, reliability, and shared goals. Slowly, the perception of humanity shifted. They were no longer seen as exiles or outcasts. They were seen as a power unlike any other, a force that did not need to dominate to succeed. One of the earliest alliances came from a planet that had been neglected for centuries. Its cities had struggled under poor resources and unpredictable weather, and it had been left out of galactic trade networks. When human representatives arrived, they offered advanced energy systems, infrastructure support, and guidance in agriculture and technology. By the time the humans left, the planet had become fully functional, connected to nearby systems, and capable of supporting trade and research. The planet's leaders were amazed. "We thought we were alone," they said. "We never imagined someone would care enough to help like this." This pattern repeated across dozens of systems. Humans expanded not through conquest, but through problem solving. Planets that had been isolated or struggling suddenly became productive, safe, and connected. Traders and explorers began referring to human-controlled space as the network, a term that reflected the efficiency, reliability, and cooperation humans had built. At the same time, humans continued improving their own systems. Research stations developed new ways to communicate faster and more securely. Fleets became more versatile, capable of long journeys and carrying essential resources to faraway systems. Cities improved with better energy efficiency, improved housing, and innovative infrastructure that made life easier for inhabitants. Every advancement reinforced the network, creating a feedback loop where progress in one system helped all others. The galaxy began to realize that they had underestimated humans in the most profound way. They had assumed exile would be the end of humanity's story. Instead, it had become the beginning of an empire. The species that was once considered a mistake had quietly built something extraordinary, a civilization that now guided entire regions of space. By the time the Central Councils decided to address humanity formally, it was already too late to take any action against them. Humans had grown too organized, too advanced, and too respected by other systems. Any attempt to challenge them would have required immense effort and resources, with no guarantee of success. The galaxy had ignored humanity for too long, and the consequences were undeniable. When representatives finally arrived to negotiate with humans, they were met not with arrogance, but with calm confidence. Humans explained their vision: a galaxy where systems worked together, where technology and knowledge were shared, and where planets could thrive without fear of neglect or exploitation. They emphasized cooperation over conflict, stability over chaos, and progress over stagnation. The councils were forced to recognize that the humans were no longer the exiled species of the past. They were leaders, not conquerors. Their network was not a threat born of aggression, but a structure built from decades of patience, creativity, and dedication. Every system that had joined humanity's network had grown stronger, safer, and more capable proving the value of human guidance. Humans also made it clear that they did not need to assert dominance to be respected. They relied on the strength of their systems, the loyalty of their allies, and the efficiency of their networks. Unlike other empires, which often used fear or manipulation to control, humans used competence, fairness, and trust. Their rise was not built on intimidation. It was built on ability. At this point, the galaxy began to change. Species that had once ignored humans now sought to learn from them, to understand how they had managed such growth in isolation. Systems that had been struggling for centuries found stability by joining human networks. Traders and explorers saw the benefit of human guidance and efficiency, and more planets voluntarily became part of the expanding empire. The story of humanity's rise became well known. Historians, scientists, and politicians studied how a species once dismissed as weak, emotional, and unpredictable had quietly grown into one of the most capable civilizations in the galaxy. The lesson was clear. Underestimation can be dangerous. A species overlooked for centuries had used patience, curiosity, and cooperation to build something far greater than anyone imagined. Despite all this recognition, humans did not become arrogant. They continued to operate in the same way they had for generations, solving problems, improving systems, and helping others. Their people still valued education, creativity, and adaptability. Their fleets were still designed for utility rather than intimidation. Their settlements remained organized, efficient, and welcoming. Their society retained the core values that had allowed them to survive exile and grow stronger. By the end of this period, humans had completed what could be called the final stage of their transformation. They had gone from a species that the galaxy had considered a mistake to an empire that now guided and connected countless systems. They had turned exile into opportunity, hardship into strength, and invisibility into influence. The galaxy had learned a difficult lesson. Banishing humanity had been a mistake. Ignoring them had been an even greater one. Through patience, ingenuity, and cooperation, humans had built a civilization capable of governing entire regions, providing stability, and shaping the future of countless worlds. The final realization spread slowly but inevitably. Humans were no longer a species to be underestimated. They had grown quietly, steadily, and effectively, proving that true strength often comes not from aggression or dominance, but from resilience, unity, and the willingness to build something lasting. And in the outer territories, as humans continued to connect more systems, explore new worlds, and improve life for countless civilizations, one truth became clear. Exile had not ended humanity's story. It had only begun a chapter that would forever change the galaxy. The galaxy had forgotten humans, dismissed them, and pushed them aside. Now it had no choice but to acknowledge them. Humanity had built an empire, not through fear, not through force, but through vision, patience, and relentless determination. And as the stars looked on, the lesson was undeniable. Never underestimate those who quietly work while others watch the skies. Humanity had taken its place in the galaxy, not as exiles, not as victims, but as leaders, innovators, and guides for a universe that had once turned its back on them. The empire was complete, and the story of exile had finally transformed into a story of greatness.